folks?
Now I hear you.
Oh, okay. Seems like there might have been some trouble earlier. Not sure if you're able to hear anything I had to say, but our class today is to be focusing on food webs. So with that, if you have tuned in previously about food webs, we are going to be talking a little bit of a different spin today. Joining me, my name is Jen, is Dana. She's going to be with our controls, and then James is going to be with us answering some of your questions today. So with that, I'm going to head over to our document camera, and as I do so, maybe think about in your head, what is a food web? Is it all about spiders? All right, so as I go on ahead and I'm adjusting the lights right now. Oh, it looks even like creepier eyes. Could just put like an eyeball. Whoopsies. And there. There we go. All right, folks, let's see if I can adjust the light a little bit better.
So you have to just change the angle of the light? Yeah.
It's a little bit tricky. Seem to be having some technical difficulties today, folks. Let me see. I will grab a piece of paper. Can never go wrong with low technology. All right, folks. So here we are. Good old piece of paper. I'm going to go on ahead and grab a pen to write with today. And let's talk about some of these food web rules. So if we go on ahead, and if it helps, maybe think of your favorite habitat. Let's see, one of my favorite habitats, aside from the ocean, because it's kind of a tricky one, I would think of maybe a forest or a prairie. Let's go with that forest. So if we think about a woodland forest of any kind, we can maybe think about the types of plants and animals that live in there and the different roles that they fill. So as we're talking about food webs today, let's go on ahead and see if we can build maybe one, a simple one. Let's go on ahead and start from the bottom up, shall we? So let's say that we have our producers, which means those that do all of that photosynthesis, right? Our producers right here. So they are the ones that use the sun to be able to photosynthesize, to be able to get their food that way, right? So they are producing their own food, they're enjoying their own food through that process of photosynthesis, right? Photosynthesis. Now, there are those that do tend to munch on that grass. So let's just say there are some woodland bunnies, right? And they're going to munch on that grass. And so they are going to, oops, there we go. Makes it a little easier for you to see. These bunnies are going to be our consumers, right? Because they are consuming, or they are eating, yum, 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 yum. All of that grass. Now, there may be, I don't know, let's just say a fox that might eat that bunny. And so this is what we like to call a secondary consumer. And our bunny is actually a primary consumer. So we have our grass, that's at the very bottom of our forest food web, or food chain, I guess, that we're doing in this case. And then bunnies might eat it, and then a fox might go on ahead and eat a bunny, right? So these are just some animals. Now, not only bunnies eat grass, right? Maybe there are some snails that like to eat that grass. Maybe there are some slugs that like to eat that grass. Maybe there's other little animals too that like to munch on that grass. So it's not just one animal that eats, but many. And so what we're going to get a chance to do is to talk a little bit about food webs, but in the ocean. All right, So, in order to be doing that today, something that we're going to be covering is from the very microscopic to all the way to us humans. Now, many of our food webs that we've talked about previously have focused in on a specific type of habitat, right? So, like for instance, a food web in the kelp forest, for instance, how the algae, the large algae off of our coast, as Dana is showing us right behind, is really kind of what builds it's like a forest that we talked about. This underwater forest here goes on ahead and it shows us exactly, what that might look like. These giant producers right here, and how they go on ahead and not only provide habitat but also food for a lot of consumers, either primary or secondary, tertiary, however much we go up that food chain or food web. And so what we're going to be doing today, though, is talking about the primary or the consumers and producers that you actually can't see with your naked eye and how they affect us as consumers. Because as I mentioned before, I do enjoy consuming food, and so I thought it'd be interesting if we looked at it through kind of a microscopic lens, but also a human lens today. So if you're curious to know what that means, we're going to go on ahead and start, of course, at the base of our food chain with the producers. And in our case, that's going to be in our ocean, phytoplankton. So these plant-like plankton, I think I might be able to show you in our document camera. Dana wants to switch us over, and it may be tricky because of that glare, but we're going to give it a shot to see how it comes out. Ah, wonderful.
If you pull the light towards you and angle it up towards you, there you go. There you go.
Thank you. All right, Dana gave me some tips, and it is helping out. Whoops, we don't want to get it too dark, though. All right, so these phytoplankton, there we go, that we happen to have here, you can see the spelling up at the top. These phytoplankton are our primary producers here in the ocean. And so pretty much no matter where you are, especially if you live along the coast, these are one of the bases of the ocean food webs in the microscopic scale. So these, phyto means green, plankton means wanderers. So these are our green wanderers and drifters. They go on ahead, and there are a whole bunch of different shapes. And there are two main varieties. There are our Dinoflagellates, and there are also our diatoms. Now, those two main groups are the ones that really do a lot of our oxygen production, actually, within the water that transfers out here for us to be able to breathe. But they're also ones that are a microscopic mini food web in themselves. Now, kind of confusing, right? Because I said, well, these are all, producers. They're actually kind of green or golden green in color, and much like plants on land, they have chlorophyll inside of them, that green pigment that helps them to get the energy from the sun. Now, all of these phytoplankton that we have here are really amazing because what they will do is they will be at the very top of the ocean, and they'll just use that sun and produce all of that glorious energy. Now, there are other animals that will eat them, but believe it or not, those dinoflagellates, pictured right here, even though many of them are actually producers, some of them are actually consumers. How can plants eat each other? Kind of weird, right? But these algae are a little bit different than plants, and some of them kind of border along the lines of kind of algae, almost kind of animal. Pretty weird. But if you go on ahead and you look at these particular plankton that we have right here, see if you can notice a common feature. Does anything stand out to you? Well, something that I noticed is that a lot of them seem to have kind of like these wispy, wiggly parts. I think there's some on this friend that we have right here that kind of look wispy and wiggly. Same thing on our serratium right here. That's just a type of one. Now, if we look at these algae, they can actually swim. I know, weird, right? Plants actually swimming? What is this world? But they absolutely can. they have two little tails, or two little flagella, like we like to call them, flagella, and there's one around the side of them right here, and there's one on the very bottom right here. So if you were one of these plankton and you put your hands around your waist, that is where one of those little wispy flagella would be, and then down by your feet is where the other one would be. And then as you swim through the water, you would actually twirl. Kind of a crazy way to be able to be an algae. But that twirling motion and those wispy flagella actually help them to hunt down other plant or other algae plankton. It's pretty nuts. So we do have some questions that are coming in, and these are great questions, so thank you so very much for asking. Some questions include, what color are phytoplankton? So what color are these plant plankton or these algae plankton? And they come in a wide range of colors, believe it or not. And a lot of those colors are due to little teeny tiny droplets of oil that are found inside of some of them. And also just the color of how they do their photosynthesis thing, right? How they project that light, or how they get that light from the sun and how they use it in their little algae bodies. And so they can be anywhere from brown to green to golden brown to they have sometimes they're even red in color, maybe orangey. So they can be lots of different colors. Looks like Danielle is asking, is red algae visible to the naked eye? Now, red algae, so I mentioned algae, right? We're looking at the microscopic kind right now that we're talking about. But we actually have red algae that you can actually see with your eye. In our oceans, we generally have three different groupings of algae. We have the browns, which are kind of like kelp or the seaweed that Dana showed a little bit ago. There are the green ones, and then we also have the red algae. So when we're thinking of the big algae that we can see with our eyes, then absolutely red algae is one of those. So thank you for making that connection. Oh, we do also have another question of asking, who is at the top of the food web and why aren't they overpopulated? Well, my friends, we have yet to get there. As I'm talking about this particular food web today, let's think about maybe, aside from our phytoplankton being the producers, right? Some of those other wispy ones, those dinoflagellates, those ones potentially could be a consumer. But if we think about plankton, well, what kind of animals eat plankton? It's a food web, right? So there could be lots of different kinds. Can you think of any animals that eat that plankton? Or that eat phytoplankton? Well, if you're thinking maybe small animals, you're absolutely correct. Or small fish even, that might be another choice. There's so many different animals that would maybe eat phytoplankton. Maybe even one of these animals right here, which would be our leafy sea dragon that we have right here. Now, these animals, these little animal plankton that love to eat the plant plankton are actually called zooplankton, spelled Z-O-O plankton. So these plankton are animal wanderers or drifters. And I think Dana might have a really cool video to share with us of some of these zooplankton or zooplankton. And these are some of our main primary consumers of our phytoplankton. So as she's finding that video, oh, there it is now. So as you can see, right, I feel like I'm drifting in this little world myself. You can see all the different varieties. Now, some of them are actually baby crabs. Some of them are baby snails. Some of them are like plankton from SpongeBob. They are so incredibly different and diverse. But this is the microscopic world out there, microscopic predators that are eating these plankton. Now, not only are there microscopic predators that we saw eating it, but so are clams too. Clams, oysters, crabs, they're also predators of that phytoplankton too. Now, they might not chase those phytoplankton down, but they will sit and they will bring the water into their mouths and they will eat all of that plankton. They're basically called filter feeders. If you imagine kind of like a pool basket or a strainer where you might have a pot of macaroni, or I had spaghetti, so spaghetti and meatballs. You might go on ahead and dump a lot of that water out to be able to get all of that goodness, right? Same thing that we have here for one of our little, I think, is that a crab? Coral crab that's in there. So cute. And you can see that it's waving its little, almost like little hairy appendages, and it is capturing and finding all those little specks that you see right there. And all of those specks are the plankton that it is going to eventually eat up. So, food web, right? Pretty crazy. Lots of different relationships, lots of different potential predators there. But if we continue the trail from plankton to phytoplankton to zooplankton to clam, and I'll write this down actually, so that way we can follow it all together. So back to my document camera here. So we're starting from the bottom, and we're starting with phytoplankton. And then we're going to go a little bit up the food chain. Who eats them? We'll say it's zooplankton. And we'll say crabs, clams, oysters. And then, since I'm doing a human connection today, humans will be at the top of this one. Now, believe it or not, you're like, well, humans, I get the crabs, clams, and oysters, as they are some of my personal favorite foods, and maybe one of yours too. But zooplankton? How do we eat those little krill? And believe it or not, there are many cuisines that do eat a lot of those krill. Those krill or those zooplankton, those animal plankton, can be great, nutritious, tasty things, as they get their nutrition directly from all of those phytoplankton, which is pretty amazing. Now, we do have a bunch of questions that are coming in, so I'll answer that before we get into our humans aspect. But Sophia's asking, are they wiggly and do they move? Now, the video that Dana put up was sort of a still shot, but if she could, Dana, if you could maybe put up one of krill, I think, or of a shrimp-like critter. Oh, yeah. Thank you for that. Let's see if we can, back to our document camera. Sure. So many options. It's almost like a food web of pictures here at the aquarium. So with this, as you can see, really adorable. But all of these krill right here are really good food for, I think I might have heard it, whales. Yeah, absolutely. Whales, a lot of smaller fish love to eat it. We actually could even use it in something called krill oil, which is another supplement, another vitamin that you can like take instead of fish oil. And so we as humans actually eat this stuff too, believe it or not. Kind of crazy to think about. But one of our main foods that we eat isn't so much this krill that we see here, but more of clams, crabs, as well as oysters. Now, raise your hand if you enjoy any of those. Excellent. Now, with that, we can eat them, right? They are absolutely delicious, absolutely tasty. But the tricky part is that sometimes we have to be careful of when we maybe pick them from the beach, if we can, if we are in an area that does allow that. Or it might not be available sometimes during certain parts of the year. And so why is that? I mean, we're kind of at the top of the food chain. So what is it? Where does that break happen in our food web? Why is it that maybe there might be less clams or crabs available? Well, any thoughts? Well, believe it or not, it's actually due to the phytoplankton. That's right. The base of the ocean food web is part of the reason why during certain times of the year, we may not be able to harvest them off the beach in areas that we normally could, or there may be times where it might not be as readily available because of something called of harmful algal blooms. If you've heard of red tide, it's actually very similar to it, Whereas one of the questions earlier was about the different colors of algae. Well, these colors of algae, when they grow, and there's so many of them, they will actually turn the color of the water to something completely different. Now, depending upon that algae, it may turn the waters orange, it may turn it red. And one question that we have about these different algae that we're seeing here is, how do plankton reproduce, right? And so that's a really great question. They actually they will split themselves in half a lot of times. At least some kinds of plankton will, and they will just basically create miniature versions of themselves, and that's how a lot of them will reproduce. And then, oh, we have some more questions coming in, such as, how long can phytoplankton live, right? So if we see something like this in our waters, right, I wonder, how long can it live? Now, if many of you were in Southern California or were familiar with maybe some of the the water that was glowing off of the Southern California coast, that was due to phytoplankton too. And so a lot of times that plankton will live for about, anywhere from a few weeks to maybe, generally about a few weeks is the general time frame. Now, many of them will die and then they'll reproduce really quickly and then they'll have a new set. So every handful of weeks, you'll get new batches of algae that will be kind of coming up. It's pretty cool that way. Irene is asking, do marine mammals see plankton? For the variety that we are talking about, they actually don't really see it unless it's in that big picture that Dana showed us earlier, where it's really kind of red or orange in color. It really kind of depends. But usually they're so small, super duper small, like the size of like the diameter of one little hair. So really teeny tiny. Isaac is asking, can we review what's at the bottom of the food web? Absolutely. And I also got a question of, do they all photosynthesize? So let's go on ahead back to my document camera to be able to review some of those concepts. So here we have our phytoplankton. So these are our plant wanderers or plant drifters. Phyto means green, or green wanderers. Plankton means wanderer. So these phytoplankton, they use the sun to be able to get their energy. And that's how they're able to survive, much like how grasses or trees might do on land. Now, many of these phytoplankton will then be eaten by the zooplankton that are directly above them. So we have a very small food chain for us today, but basically it's looking at all of these animal plankton. So zoo actually means animal wanderer. And so these small little animal wanderers are going to eat a lot of these algae wanderers that we have at the very base of the food chain. Now, of course, it's a food web, right? It's not only that one type of animal that eats that phytoplankton. And so we also have crabs, clams, oysters, are just to name a few, mainly because these are the ones that we as humans tend to eat. And so here we have a really small kind of food web going on, but all of these kind of, we're all interconnected with each other, right? So we are directly affected by these phytoplankton that we have in that water. Oh my, more questions are coming in. How much krill do blue whales eat? Yeah, because the krill are definitely a type of zooplankton, right? Animal wanderer. And blue whales, so those are the ones that are like our biggest whale that love to eat all of that krill. They eat anywhere from 4 to 8,000 pounds of krill. Can you believe that? 4 to 8,000 pounds. Just think about how much krill there is in the ocean. And then, whoa, just think about how much phytoplankton must be in the ocean to support that krill. My goodness, so many. These questions are fantastic. Thank you for asking. Now, with these blooms of plankton that are changing the color of our water, it can actually affect the health of our animals too, including us as well. And so there are certain times of the year, as I mentioned before, that you can't always eat those shellfish, and that's because some of those red tides, some of those changing algae will actually cause some poison or toxins that are in the water. And so that's why they're called harmful algal blooms, or one of the reasons why. And so when these different animals are actually eating these harmful phytoplankton, it can be a little bit tricky to see when it's okay to continue eating shellfish and when it might not be. So I'm going to head back to the document camera so that way we can explore that concept a little bit more. So, oops, turn my paper over here. So if we think about our, say this is our phytoplankton. And let's just say it's one of those toxic varieties. Now, it'll be eaten by some zooplankton. There we go. And then if we continue up our food chain, maybe it'll be eaten by a clam. That's my clam, though it kind of looks like a taco. I think that made it look more like a taco. And then, let's just say we have us. Human. I label all my drawings because I'm not very artistic. And so, when our animal plankton eat our plant plankton, they actually don't just stick to one, they will eat several. So in this case, let's just say the zooplankton ate maybe, we'll say 10 of these phytoplankton. All right. And we'll say this clam ate, oh, I don't know, what do you think? Yeah, we'll say maybe 5 of these zooplankton. And let's just say I'm a really hungry human and I go on ahead and I eat 10 clams, right? We are actually moving up the food chain. Now, you're like, well, how does it move up the food chain? That is a good question. If we go on ahead and we think about how we're actually moving up the food chain, we have 10 plankton, right? If I go back to my document camera, 10 plankton, and there's 5 clams. That means these 5 clams are eating the plankton that ate the 10 phytoplankton. So that means that our clam ate 50 of these phytoplankton. And that means if this human ate 5 clams, that means I ate, wait, brain memory not great here. All right, let's try that again. So our clam went ahead and ate about 50 of these. And then let's just say I ate 10 of these. That means that I ate 500, because we just need to add a 0 here, 500 of these phytoplankton. All right. So that's kind of crazy to think about, right? How it's being what we like to call biomagnified up the food chain that we have right here. All right, friends. Now I know that was a lot to kind of take in right there. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, but I wanted to make sure that I got to some of these lasting questions, and then I'm happy to answer any additional questions that you might have through our email. So question is it safe to swim in red tide water? That is a really good question, and I think it really kind of depends on the type, but usually it's pretty to look at. And I think going in may be okay, but it really depends on the kind. It's tricky to say unless you take a sample and really look at a microscope. So it's not like there's just one variety. There are a lot of varieties. Some of the red tides aren't really great for animals or humans, and others aren't so bad. But you don't really know until you actually look at the specific type, in which you need to take an actual plankton sample and then look at it underneath the microscope. So it really kind of depends. And then another question is, after they split in half, so I believe it's a question in regards to reproduction of our phytoplankton, do they control each of those bodies? And yes, individually, they become completely new individuals, which is really crazy to think that they would split themselves in half and become two new ones, but they sure do. All right, last question. Can zooplankton be other colors? Absolutely. So sometimes they actually take on the color of their food. Other times, though, different zooplankton are actually different colors altogether. So it really depends on the particular animal of choice. In our case, looking at the krill, I have some right here, and I can also put it under the docu-cam real quick. These krill are actually kind of orangey in color right here. And so it'll, our animals, like our jellies here at the aquarium, when they eat krill or brine shrimp, little smaller relatives of these friends, they will slightly turn orange. And so it is pretty interesting how these different animals could change color depending upon their food. All right, friends. Well, thank you so very much for joining us today. Once again, if you do have any questions and we were unable to answer them, you can always go on ahead and email us at live@lbaop.org. Again, live@lbaop.org. And thank you so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.